born into the world has a name. Some names are easy to pronounce, while others represent varying degrees of difficulty. On some occasions, we find the need to change our names due to marriage or religion. Then there are those who do not particularly like their name, but the fact remains that everybody has a name to be remembered. Some years ago, the students at the University of California began to protest, insisting that nobody knows my name. Classes with 500 to 1,000 students tend to become impersonal. Each student has a number for the purpose of identification. The professor does not have the time nor the patience to invest in a personal knowledge of that many students for such a short period of time. Yet each person has a need to be known, to be loved, to be affirmed. A name is to be remembered, and because this human principle was violated, the students protested and ventilated their disapproval. Remember my name. The story is told of a middle-aged man who went to his older sister one day to ask, if I was called my right name, what would my name be? The implication is not grounded in the man's inability to remember. He raised a question regarding the identity of his father. In the middle years of his life, his inquiring mind wanted to know who his father was. I too have asked, similarly, if I was called my right name, what would it be? Just to briefly explain, my father's mother, or my grandmother, was a single young woman in 1952 living in a small town near an army base at the height of the Korean War. She met an army man on his way to war, and they had a brief relationship resulting in the conception and birth of my father. About a year earlier, grandmother had given birth to Dad's sister. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years to a time in which my father and his sister were school age, together, and attending the same school. Dad officially was named Zorn from his army father, who had gone off to the Korean War and never knew he had a son, while his sister was named Manning, after her birth father. Can you see where this may have led to some confusion or embarrassment and even bullying or harassment for my aunt and father? In our American society, we tend to carry the last name of our fathers. Although we did not ask for and may not be particularly particular about having this name, it belongs to males forever. More than that, males have successfully passed their names on to their children. Females have the opportunity to change their names through marriage, but males have their names forever, with a few exceptions, including the issue of my father's last name, which was legally changed to Manning, and that name was passed to me from my father, though I have often considered legally taking my rightful name, Zorn. But I have been Manning all my life, and that name has my reputation, good or bad, attached to it. A legal change would open a web of endless questions and answers, not to mention who is Bishop Zorn. The man in the story wanted to know who his father really was, so that he could know his real name. I also hold on to my real name because of the heritage and history it has that pertains to me. Just like the man wanting to know who his father was, I needed to know who my ancestors were, and with that, the rightful name they passed down to me. A name to be remembered. The Gospel writers have emphasized for us the importance of a name. That means the identification of self-disclosure. Matthew establishes the scene in chapter 16 in which Jesus asks his disciples what people were saying about his identity. One might say this was a question of public perception. Who do men say that I am? Peter quickly declared, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." In other words, even Jesus wrestled with the issue of a name. That means of clearly identifying one from all the rest. Jesus, the one who had a name above every name, just wanted to make sure that the people of his day, and especially his followers, knew who he was. His name was to be remembered for all times and in all places. So let us discuss a name to be remembered as made available to us in our lesson from Exodus. Take it from three perspectives: the name, the mission, and the plan. First, consider the name. A name sets forth the character of its bearer. It seeks to tell something about the person. Moses wanted to know the name of the one who had empowered him with the right of leadership, recognizing that the Israelites had neither voice nor vote in the matter. Moses said, "When they ask me your name, what then shall I tell them?" Moses wanted information on one hand, but he also wanted a relationship on the other. He did not want to be a stranger to this missionary sending agent. He might have said, "Tell me your name so that I can appear halfway intelligent to the people you want me to help." But if we go back to verse 6, God had already issued a disclosure of identity to Moses. God said, "I am your God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." The question has to be raised whether Moses had forgotten this name to be remembered, or whether he was just seeking assurance that God would help him when the going got tough. The church should answer at least this question for Moses. Because we can tell Moses, "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Under the shadow of thy throne, still may we dwell secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defense is sure." J.H. Hertz, who was the first graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America and became the chief rabbi of United Hebrew Congregations of the British Empire, believed that no words can sum up all that he will be to his people, but his everlasting faithfulness and unchanging mercy will more and more manifest themselves in the guidance of Israel. In other words, God is my all and all. Whatever I am, God is my supplier. Wherever I am, God is present. Whatever I fail to see or know, God sees and knows. All I know to tell you is that God is. Just fill in the blanks of your life. God takes my incompleteness and makes me whole. The writers of the Dictionary of the Bible contend that for the Hebrews, every name represented the very selfhood of the person who bore it. It was the same for the holy name of God. His name expressed his power and holiness. The very fact that God had revealed his name to the Hebrews was a sign of his special care for them. They regarded the divine name with great reverence. It was not to be used carelessly. It is with the holy name of God in mind that the power of John Macquarie, theologian, philosopher, Anglican priest, and author of Principles of Christian Theology and Jesus Christ in Modern Thought, that's a mouthful, comes through and exclaiming, "All through the Hebrew Scriptures, the one God of Israel is contrasted with the many gods of the pagans. Israel's God alone acts. The idols are only pretend gods, unreal and ineffective. The Old Testament makes no attempt to prove the existence of God. The reality of God is presupposed." One might, however, take issue with Dr. Macquarie in insisting that the reality of God is not presupposed, but is rather internalized within the hearts of the believer. God becomes that something within that the world may not understand or be able to explain. Nonetheless, God is real within our souls. Somebody else said, "Yes, God is real, for I can feel him in my soul." God said, "This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. The name I am who I am, or simply I am, is to be remembered forever. God certainly utilized the first person singular of the conjugated verb to be as a self-disclosure. The name I am must be remembered always. Now let us look at the mission. John Huesman, S.J., author, professor at the University of California at Berkeley, and highly esteemed biblical archaeologist. He contends that after the revelation of his name, God elaborates the mission of his newly chosen instruments. Moses is to lead his fellow Hebrews to the land of the Canaanites, and his invitation will be heeded by the people. The Pharaoh's reaction will not be favorable. Loath to lose these valuable slaves, he will loudly protest their departure. Only the tempting hand of Yahweh will eventually urge him to face them. Nor are Yahweh's people to leave the land empty-handed. Their long years of slavery are to be repaid in a spoliation of the Egyptians before their departure. God's mission was to bring deliverance for the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt. Israel was God's chosen people, and God came to the point of being tired of seeing families suffer at the hands of someone else. The determination was to set them free. American theologian James Cone has said in his 1970 publication, A Black Theology of Liberation, that God meets us in the human situation, not as an idea or concept that is self-evidently true. God encounters us in the human condition as the liberator of the poor and the weak, empowering them to fight for freedom because they were made for it. God is where we are in the struggle of the world to be free. All over the world, where persons are subjected to poverty, racism, sexism, economic despair, and social injustices, God is always present and intervenes on their behalf. God came to the world in human form to set free the least of these. Luke chapter 4 reminds us of an experience of Jesus in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. He was presented the scroll to read. He read from the prophet Isaiah, where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This text is particularly appealing because verse 21 tells us that Jesus declared, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." In other words, Jesus had compassionate concern for the poor, the prisoners, the blind, the oppressed, and then proclaimed the year of Jubilee. Now that's good news. Jesus, very God and very man, was bold enough to declare that I have come so that the rejected society might know that they are somebody. The downtrodden can receive a new lease on life. The hopeless of the world can refrain from singing the words of American author, educator, lawyer, diplomat, songwriter, and civil rights activist James Weldon Johnson, "When hope unborn has died, abortions will never again be performed in order to kill the hopes of the least of these." God has a mission in place for the persecuted of society. God's mission is for us to be brought up out of our misery in Egypt into a land of prosperity. We will be brought to a land flowing with milk and honey. God understood the mission in that distant yesterday, but more importantly, God understands our needs today and has a mission for us. But in order for God's mission to have meaning in our lives, it must become our mission. We must understand that nobody can succeed in saving us but us. Nobody can really help us out of our despair unless and until we decide that we want to be helped. In our deliverance, we must become active, willing participants. The sad commentary is that the bondage of Israel in Egypt in the experience of Moses is alive today in any city and town of America and the world. What is worse is that too many of our congregations are also shackled beneath a heavy burden because their spirits are not free. We have refused to accept the power of the Holy Spirit that transforms human life and sets us free. So congregation after congregation in all of our denominations are not only encountering slavery and bondage, but are indeed the living dead. May you hear God declaring, I have come to bring you up out of Egypt. So, therefore, that is the mission of God. Now, finally, let us consider God's plan. Any mission that is to be successful has to have a plan. What is God's plan for our salvation? It was Moses who received the instructions for missionary service that represented the plan of God for the salvation of Israel. The plan affirms a relationship with God. God speaks directly with Moses, not through a messenger or interpreter, but directly to him. Moses had to go and assemble the elders. Some believe that God chose the young man because he was strong, but chose the old man because he knew the way. It was then the seasoned experience of the elders that Moses had to bring together. In a time when we need to emphasize the growth and development of our youth, we must never allow ourselves to forget or neglect the importance of our elders. The church needs the meaningful involvement of its mature adults to help chart its course of deliverance based upon their many years of experience. Our young have theoretical knowledge, but our elders are knowledgeable experientially. Therefore, we must neither abandon our elders nor prematurely put them out to pasture. Moses treasured his relationship with God and affirmed it with his obedience. He did what God told him to do. He went to the elders of Israel. Furthermore, Moses acknowledged the promises of God. God said, I will strike the Egyptians with all the wonders, and I will bring you up out of your misery in Egypt. Not only did Moses acknowledge the promises of God, he believed that God would follow through. God would divinely intervene on behalf of Israel because the promise was trustworthy and true. Now, we must not forget that God started on the journey of promise with Abraham. I will be your God and you shall be my people. The divine relationship had already been established. And so God is merely reflecting on the consistency of the promise, wavering neither to the right nor the left. We read in the New Testament that our communication ought to be yea, yea, or nay, nay. We should always say what we mean and mean what we say. God operates that way and so is worthy of our trust. Therefore, whenever God comes through for us, when God delivers on the promise, there ought justifiably to be an opportunity to celebrate. The joy should be so intense until we become incapable of holding back. We might compare this to the songwriter who tried to tell how he felt when the Lord came into his life. He wrote, I said I wasn't going to tell nobody, but I couldn't keep it to myself. What the Lord has done for me. In other words, Jesus is too good and too sweet and too wonderful for one person to keep to himself. Now that's what church is all about. We come together as brothers and sisters to celebrate what the Lord has done for us. We ought to tell how good God has been to us personally. We should witness that God is wonderful, that he has taken us from a state of nothingness and allowed us the privilege of making a significant contribution to the betterment of humankind. The church ought to be an area of joyous celebration every time the doors open. God's name is a name to be remembered. It should be alive in us as members of the family. I challenge you to take God with you everywhere you go. And then may the people whose lives interact with yours know that there is something different and special about you. Different because you look and act like a child of God. Never forget who you are. Every name carries with it a story of how it eventually came to you. Never forget how important your name is and the heritage and reputation intertwined in the history of that name. And certainly, forever and always, remember the name, I am.
Amen.
Amen.